Hey, it's Vladimira,
And I'm Nektarios.
and this is Naked by the Future Farm.
Join us as we strip entrepreneurship to its vulnerable core. Hi, today we start with a content warning. This episode deals with the subject of suicide. Please only listen or watch if and when you're feeling ready and able. Our guest today went viral because of a speech that started with the words, "When I founded the Climate Connection, I was suicidal." Juliette Devillard shares with us her experience with suicidal ideation. We explore the different factors that led to her standing at a balcony trying to figure out what it would take to do it. This did not come about overnight. It was a gradual build-up of thoughts and patterns, of layers and layers. But it did lead to the feeling that in all the pain, it felt easier to not exist. Many of us can relate to the impostor syndrome, the fear of failure, wondering if we're good enough, and the constant rejection that comes with startup life. But what does it take to recognize what is happening and what you can do? Juliette talks about the small steps and the big steps that helped her to not go beyond looking down that balcony, removing herself physically from a location that was not good for her, therapy, coaching, meditation, all driven by the recognition that she had to make getting better her top priority. Michael Freeman gets a mention, telling us that mental health is like a sport. You have to practice it to get better at it, and if you neglect it, it can get worse. We'll learn about Juliette's ways of managing her well-being now, a checklist to look for signals that she might not be doing well, using it also as a first responder's guide for the people around her to also look for the signals, but also know how to react. All the work seems to pay off. Juliette recently realized that it is possible to move from being in the movie to being in the cinema watching the movie. As a result of her experience, she started Beyond Resilience, an initiative that is helping organizations who work with founders to bring all the learnings and techniques to the entrepreneurial world. Please meet Juliette.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Nektarios. Hello, Juliette. Welcome to Naked.
Hello, lovely to be here.
Hi Juliette. Hi Vladi. How's things?
Are you asking the real question, or as Juliette said, this is always the hard question to answer. So I was like, do you really want me to answer?
No, this was my just filling space.
Okay. So, but we always, to be fair to the ethos of Naked, let's do a circle. Let's do a check-in. So I'll start. So I was sharing with both of you that we come into these conversations with things that we carry from the day, right? And you find yourself in the present moment. So I was aiming to be in the mindful space, and I am very excited though that is there. But the mindful part, I forgot it somewhere on the way. So this meeting that was agitating and triggering. But I feel like I'm already breathing through it, and as we checked in with each other, it really does keep sort of evolving and changing. You can sort of follow your energy. So I think as we do it at NEEM, on the scale from 0 to 10, 10 being really great, I think at the moment probably on 7.5, and then let's see, I'm hoping to go high as possible by end of this session, but really excited. So I'm really doing this Monday check-in from me. We do this. I'll hand over to Juliette. So Juliette, how are you?
I feel quite similar to you, Vladdy, in that I was looking at my agenda for the day yesterday night when I was kind of planning what I was going to do today, and I was very ambitious in what I wrote on that to-do list. Not accounting for this block of time and a bunch of other meetings, and I kind of got to a half an hour before this and was like, oh, I should probably have created some space around this podcast so that I could settle in and be in the right headspace to connect really deeply, and suddenly I found myself walking in being like, whoa, there's actually all these things hovering around in the back of my mind. And so I've taken a few breaths before joining, and I'm more settled now, but I can empathize with what you were saying.
Good. So I think we can settle in together. I think that's the beauty of this space as well, that it actually allows us for that honesty and be like checking where we really are. So thanks for sharing. Nektarios, how are you doing in Greece?
So we didn't
You
do
must
the
be doing
usual.
well.
We're not doing the usual "where in the world are you?" But we know that Juliette, you're in London. Vladi looks like she's in Pakistan. I'm in Greece. I'm in Thessaloniki, northern Greece, where I come once a quarter to hang with family. And during the day, I work from a hotel, which has a very calming effect on me because I overlook a garden, which you can see in the background. So I'm actually pretty zen from that perspective, but I've got a little bit too comfortable over the last couple of days. So my to-do list is getting longer. So I have an element of, I can feel the tentacles of procrastination sort of kind of starting to grab hold of me. So I need to put that aside and be very present for this conversation. But overall, I'm fine because it's always nice to be here. It's always nice to be with family. And it's always nice to eat good food, which is one of the main reasons I come to Greece anyway.
I have to say, I love tentacles of procrastination. That is an excellent image that I am so going to steal off you for future conversations, because yes, that feels real.
It's all yours.
He does throw a lot of treasures, you know. I think there's some IP potential, Nektarios, new revenue model. But yeah, he does. Wonderful. So I was thinking how to sort of start this conversation, because when Julia talked in our preparation, I think we walked out of there together with Nektarios with like, wow, there's a lot of topics we can sort of unpack and help normalize and work on together. I got a little bit of sense that it might also be quite heavy for some of our listeners. So some of the subject that we want to very bravely, I think, talk about together with you might be new for some people because they, let's say, never really had the opportunity to talk about that subject with anyone. But I think there is a lot of curiosity, at least on my side, to dive into that story with you on the personal side. And sort of, I think you are beautifully eloquent and raw speaker in that way, or reflector, if I can use that way. You know, Nektarios, he throws in those treasures that people actually want to walk away with, you know, in terms of the vocabulary. What you will realize over time is that I throw in my Vladi vocabulary, which are words that don't even exist. So just, you know, we balance each other out. So let me start, Juliette, in a place where we met, which was the virtual world. So I remember seeing this super uber viral post on LinkedIn, and we both saw it with Nektarios, and I saw that actually a lot of people from my community already engaged on it, and I was like, wow, and it's on mental health. And then I started reading the post, and I obviously saw the video because there was a video attached to it, and it was very touching at first. I think there was a mix of emotions, but I think rather than me describing it, I would like to invite you to tell our naked listeners, what was it that you think made it viral? Like, what was it that made you even share the content that you shared in that post that became really popular, resonated with thousands, really, in the digital community?
Yeah, happy to share. You know, it's always difficult to tell exactly what it is that strikes a chord, because you don't, you know, you're not in the minds and hearts of people who watch these things. But what I heard from a lot of people after I posted that video, and yeah, I would say mostly after the video rather than the speech itself, because I think on the day when people saw it in person, there's perhaps some more hesitance about speaking live in a kind of crowded context. But individually, a lot of people reached out to me and shared that for them, it was the first time that they had seen someone speak openly and in, on a professional platform like LinkedIn about a real mental health struggle put in the context of work and in the context of acknowledging how many other people go through that, but just in a very kind of honest way. And it makes sense to me that that was what resonated with people, because I wrote that speech the morning of. I run a climate community that brings together people of all backgrounds working on climate change. And we do big monthly events that we get about 180 people to every time. And usually when I run these events, I give, a little bit of an introductory speech, maybe a reflection on some industry trends or something that's happened in the climate world. And that morning I woke up and I realized I didn't actually have any reflections around the industry that I wanted to share. And as I got up and I sat down ready to meditate that morning, I opened my meditation app and I realized, oh, it's my 100th day of meditating in a row. And the awareness that I'd been planning at some point to speak about the journey that I'd been through, my struggles with suicide, seeing the impact of the way the entrepreneurial sector works in terms of how people in entrepreneurship and just in the professional world and maybe the world at large relate to suicide and mental health and any form of kind of challenge that people may have on the mental health front. These different factors of the 100th day of meditation, the awareness of the industry, and it being about to be May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month, at least I think in the UK, but possibly worldwide, led me to realize that, maybe this was the day that I was going to speak about it. And so it was a very spur of the moment decision. And yeah, that speech was the embodiment of that. It was a summary of what I went through, putting that in the context of acknowledging that, so many people go through this, and also so many people don't speak about it because of the way that our professional world is set up to prejudice against people who have mental health, and to lead so much stigma in speaking about it that could actually damage your own business or your own chances of success if you were to actually be open about what you're going through.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Thank you, Juliette. It's interesting because Vladi did her intro talking about your post. You talked a little bit about what led you to do what you did that day. And in this, you casually threw in the S word and you mentioned suicide. Now, we're in the business of talking about mental health quite a bit. But even within mental health conversations, there is a whole range of things that are more commonplace and more acceptable to talk about. And there's still other subjects that are still more taboo. Even the fact that people just mention suicidal ideation in a list of other manifestations, but usually go into the details of depression, anxiety, and other things, makes that particular subject special and quite unique, and maybe even more stigmatized than the general mental health stigmatization. So I'm super grateful that you did what you did on that day, but also that you're here with us, because we're really curious to also understand a little bit more what that actually means. In the research that we found way back by Dr. Michael Freeman, that we always refer to because it's still the only study that's been published.
Which I also cited in that speech. Thank you, Michael Freeman.
So the likelihood of an entrepreneur experiencing suicidal ideation is twice as high as the general population. And that's just one of the many statements you can extract from that study. But what was it actually that you shared on the day that you shared that? When you say it was your 100th day of meditation, there was a journey between you experiencing something, then deciding to meditate. So maybe you can share a little bit more about your actual experiences.
Yeah. When it comes to what I spoke about in the speech, I was suicidal for a year and a half. And that coincided almost exactly with around the time that I founded the business that I run right now and was started to work on it full time. And so, the opening line of that speech, if I recall correctly, was, very few people know this, but when I founded Climate Connection, I was suicidal. And I think just the power of that statement and acknowledging the reality of that being the case, that people can create businesses when they're in really dark moments, that people run through, live on a day-to-day basis with those really dark thoughts, and yet continue to get up and face the day and so forth. But acknowledging the reality of that struggle, I think is very rarely done. To point out what you just said, right? Even within the mental health space, the word suicide is even more stigmatized, right? We often actually don't say suicide. We say like ending my life, or we sort of walk around the topic like thoughts of non-existence and all of these different kind of ways of saying it. And there's so much stigma even built into just like our natural language. Like I don't know if this is true across all Anglophone cultures, but certainly in the ones that I've lived in, it's very frequent to still say committed suicide, where committed suicide, committed being like committed a crime, and it comes from, the remaining judgment that we have, often from, I think, Christian backgrounds around ending your life being seen as a sin against God who gave you that life. And so we still have language built into the way that we speak about this that creates a feeling of culpability and of, whoever is thinking of ending life, they must be in the wrong. And I think you're very right about that.
Yeah. By the way, Juliette, thanks for saying that, because I think it's really powerful that just acknowledging how many layers are we carrying with our language and some sort of formats or thinking patterns and concepts in our life and beliefs. And many of us rarely look back. So yeah, I can relate to some level of maybe even awkwardness, the level of maybe shame, fear. It's a mix of emotions that come or are associated with the experience. Probably a big unknown for people as well due to stigma. But yeah, the power of the words and what lies behind them.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Nektarios. You go.
Or you want to build on your, why don't you build on it?
I was curious to go a little bit further back because you talk about it now because you clearly have spent time unpacking it, working through it. But being able to say, when I started that business, I was already suicidal, requires a point of insight. And I'm a little bit curious about that particular point. So, because one of the things we know from personal experience, but also from the people we're talking to through the Future Farm, is we all know that there's signals, but the very first stage is finding a vocabulary around those signals. Do you have that moment where you remember that you kind of went, all these things are going on, and now I can actually, I've got the guts, or maybe there was something that happened to nudge you towards acknowledging, oh my God, it's that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really valid point. I think it's, you don't go from being perfectly okay to being suicidal from one day to the next. It is a gradual buildup of thoughts and patterns, and it takes time to get to that stage in most cases, I would say, per my knowledge. Go find a health professional to confirm that one, but there is a buildup. And I remember for me what that day was. And so there are a lot of circumstances in my case that led to different thoughts developing and, an overall higher level of unhappiness in my life than I'd experienced before. Some of them were related to the pandemic, to isolation, to being, in the Swiss Alps at the time, completely removed and isolated from any kind of community of folks my age. And then there was caring for a, very depressed mother who I spent 6 months with, again, in a pandemic context, pouring all of my energy into helping her be better and helping her be functional. Which, if we go back again to the literature, Michael Freeman, the studies again show a lot of entrepreneurs are statistically way more likely to have immediate family members that are also experiencing mental health issues. And so to kind of keep going on that trend, the final piece was transitioning out of a work situation where I had experienced significant difficulty with some of the people that I was working with. And so I had a feeling, I had a lot of emotions at the time of feeling like my identity had been tied to work that I now felt conflicted about. And I no longer felt like I was giving my 100%. And that meant that I had a lot of negative self-reflections around who am I if I'm not doing well enough, if I'm not pouring everything that I am into a cause that I used to believe in. And to a certain extent, a cause I still believe in. But at the time, there were factors that meant that it was harder for me to connect to that. So a confluence of those three factors of dealing with depressive family members, a pandemic, and disappointment at my own kind of attitude and performance at my previous workplace led to me feeling really destabilized, really shaken, feeling like my sense of identity and who I was no longer as concrete as it was previously. I was struggling to place myself, moving from, Juliette, the high achiever, Juliette, who's got her shit together, Juliette, who like loves humans and spends time helping people and whatever, to Juliette, who doesn't really know what she's working on and doesn't really know what's next, who doesn't see people and therefore can't express that side of herself that loves helping other humans, and Juliette, who feels burnt out because she's spent so much time trying to help out one specific human that it's always very difficult to care for someone with very strong mental illness. So in the midst of all of that, there was a day when I remember noticing for the first time that in all that pain and in feeling those negative thoughts about myself, it felt easier to me to not exist. The idea of just no longer being in this world was appealing as a way of no longer suffering by my current existence in this world. And those thoughts, I think, had been around and kind of on the periphery, but there was just a moment where I remember, I think, being kind of on a balcony and sort of thinking, wow, like, I wonder how high it would need to be for me to be able to actually do that in my life. And then I was like, oh, okay. This is darker and deeper, and I need to face the fact that I'm at this point. I'm not just unhappy, I'm also suicidal. And that realization was really important, as you say, the putting a word on it, having a moment to realize that, okay, this is where we are, and that means I need to do something about this.
I feel like this just
exactly.
I just wanted to acknowledge that I think it's inviting a moment just to, take a deep breathe in and out. At least that's how I felt, like deep down in the stomach. But yes, Nektarios, you had a question.
No, I was literally going to say the same thing. There was a moment when you started getting deeper into the details, Juliette, where I started. So Vladi feels it in her stomach. I feel it in my chest. It's quite interesting. But for me, the chest gets really heavy, and I could feel the heaviness. I could feel quite a bunch of things, but there was one which is this confluence of things, this layer upon layer just accumulating, and it happens gradually. But I also felt a sense of relief that you actually were aware enough to be facing the situation going, oh, I need to listen. I need to do something about this, because that's not necessarily a given, right? Because often people are confused about these feelings and scared, but maybe not as aware, as self-aware as you, to go, oh my God, this is what's coming together. Oh, what do I do now, right? Did you have any practices or things before that actually allowed you to be as aware as this? And don't know, kind of to speculate, but dealing with a depressed mother probably creates an environment where you're more aware of certain things. But were you actively doing stuff before that led you to that level of introspection and awareness?
I know I haven't thought about the answer to that question. I think there's a degree to which I'm probably always just baseline quite reflective. Some of it, I think, comes from perhaps a personality trait that actually leads to a higher prevalence for this type of thinking, right? There's a perfectionist side to me that wants to be always, doing better, and whatever the word better may be associated to, right? That could be within a professional success context, or what am I planning with my life, and so forth. And so I think when you have that trait of having been maybe socialized or trained, or perhaps developed, whatever way you want to think about why our personality traits emerge, but when you recognize that you're someone who is always sort of like analyzing and looking at how to change and improve and do the next thing, then it leads, I think, to just constant reflection loops of what's going on in my life right now. Like, why am I in this state? Why am I in this particular thought pattern? Why am I in this less than ideal personal or professional circumstances? So I think for me, probably a certain amount of it came from just that, and acknowledging that personality trait meant that I was probably more reflective and more aware. Now, I definitely have had a practice of meditation for a long time. It was not consistent. I think during that period, often when we're in our darkest moments, it's actually those hardest times to maintain those types of practices. But it's entirely possible that having had at least that practice in the past may have also helped me. But I couldn't give you a strong answer for sure.
I'm curious where, in the moment of realization or reflecting on, wow, this is probably what's happening to me, where from that moment happened the business? Can we plug in the journey of founding your business? And also, are you a first-time founder, solo founder? Because I feel like some of those factors, they really chip into the overall experience, and sometimes to additional layers of stress or pressure for people. So how does the business arrive into your life?
Yeah. That's a difficult one. I would say can we hit pause for 1 second?
Of course.
Yeah.
Can I share just something that's on my mind that's
fine? I'm going to let me rephrase the question a little bit. So I was curious, Juliette. So now you took us through the experience of getting to the moment of actually realizing, wow, this is probably what's happening to me. How did the layer of being a founder sort of further impacted your overall well-being and state of self? Because we know, as you guys mentioned, the statistics, right, from our friend, Dr. Michael Freeman, he really has to now give us, I think, some, side back revenue for mentioning him, but now we love him so much. So we know that being a founder, additional layers of pressure, we are predispositioned to some extent to be more exposed to mental health experiences. But in practical way, can you share with us, what did that mean for you at that time, experiencing this state of being, to be a founder as well?
Yeah. So I founded the company after I moved to London. And so I was already aware of the darkness of some of my thoughts, of what I was going through. And I think what happens with every founder is you're going to be going through a lot of stress, particularly as a first-time founder, around questions of, am I able to do this? Like, talk about imposter syndrome, right? When you decide to create something by yourself for the first time, and probably even for second or third time founders, there is always going to be questions out there of, is this actually something that I have the skills to do? Am I just going to create this and fail? Am I good enough, right? Like, there's that fundamental question that I think all humans feel on some level in some ways, but can be really, really strong to deal with. Before I keep going, can you hear that background noise? Do you want me to close the window? Is that
I was
interfering?
good. No, can't hear
Good,
anything.
good.
All
Okay.
good.
Give me 1 sec. It's like a leaf blower outside. Yeah. So as a founder, you have all of your regular, whatever you had before you go into being a founder, right? If you came in with anxiety, depression, suicide, or just, here are the little things in my life that made me unhappy, like all of those things are going to be there. And then you're going to add on the stress of, okay, I now likely have no stable source of income. I now have a project, and also to a certain extent, a kind of public image. Even if you're stealth, you still have that concept of being a founder and entrepreneur amongst your friends and family. There's an expectation with the word founder of like, to do great things. And so when you start to do something by yourself for the first time, you're adding all of these layers of belief in yourself. Are you good enough? Are people, like, are you going to fail or not in a way that's quite public? It's not like a report at work where your boss writes you up in something and nobody hears about it aside from maybe the person who's in your team with you or whatever else. Like, if you fail as a founder, you're your own boss and the consequences are pretty public. And so there's just layers that get added onto whatever you already came in with. And so when you get into loops, or if you think about what might trigger a suicidal ideation loop, or perhaps other uncomfortable thoughts that people may have depending on their circumstances, what you're basically doing is just creating a set of circumstances where it's more likely than the norm that you're going to have negative inputs and negative self-thought that are going to contribute to that. And that's kind of just within your own mental state. And then there's all of the rest of like, hey, I'm out and I'm building and I'm speaking to people all the time. And the number of rejections and things that early stage founders get, right? Because you're testing something and it's not ready, which means it's not perfect. It's not adjusted to the people that you're talking to and selling to. And so you're going to be getting a lot of no's, either from customers or investors or just people who you speak to about your idea. So those are some pieces of that, I think.
People might want to, I was just thinking, it's not that funny, but when people listen to Nektarios, they might even want us to rephrase the title as something that we are encouraging people to become founders and entrepreneurs, because one might ask, like, with all of this happening, going into this, now knowing, right, having some level of awareness, why would you do this to yourself? But I think that's a whole different question, which we have answers to, right? That they're partially conscious and partially unconscious. Yes, Nektarios, I saw you had a question there.
No, the question for me was, so you told us that you did this for the first time and by yourself, right? Now, we know that doing this for the first time is difficult. Doing this by yourself is differently difficult, but when you compound the two, it gets extra difficult. Did you have any support network, anybody you could actually talk to that would take the place of a co-founder or some sort of sympathetic ear or a shoulder occasionally?
So I didn't have a co-founder or kind of a close to co-founder relationship and I haven't had for the entirety of this journey. I've been lucky that I happen to have a circle of friends that are much more conscious, I think, than the average about mental health, about struggles that people might be going through, but also openness to things like therapy and coaching and so forth. And I say that knowing that a number of my friends are themselves actually coaches and therapists, and or ex-founders and so forth. And so what I did have, luckily, was an environment in which, once I overcame the internal stigma of wanting to speak about it, which still existed, even in an environment of knowing that people, in theory, at least understand these concepts, if not themselves practice professions where they're actively dealing with it. Once I overcame my internal stigma about sharing what was going on for me, I, luckily was surrounded by people who not only could empathize, but also were exceptionally good, I would say, at being able to say, hey, like, you should get help in XYZ way. And here are some tools that I refer my clients to. And maybe we should check in about this on a regular basis.
That's wonderful.
Who was the first person
glad for you
talked to when you realized, when you had your balcony moment?
I phoned up my best friend of 10 years who lived in London. And I said, I need to get out of here. And I basically invited myself / he invited me to leave Switzerland and the house I was staying in, where I was caring for my mother, and fly to the UK and just live on his sofa. And that actually kickstarted for me, that move to London, which I think was going to happen anyway, and was something I wanted to do, but it made it happen sooner. And it started a new period of my life, which actually resulted in me living on sofas for the next 9 months. For the next 9 months, I didn't have a stable address, and I lived continuously on people's sofas. Actually,
you
as I was
piled it
going
up
through all of this.
yeah.
Yeah, I did. I really did. And but that shift was really important. And step one for me in that case was removing one of the factors, and that factor was the two actually, the isolated environment and the 24/7 care for my mother. And so being able to step out of both of those and move myself to a new city enabled me to at least somewhat stabilize the situation. Not necessarily make it better, but certainly stop the downward spiral that it was going towards.
And so if we look at those more as interventions that were really essential for you to, as you said, stabilize the situation, what was it later on the side of, let me work on getting better? How does that support system looks like?
Wow, there's so many interesting little steps in this. But
oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, no,
we're ready for it.
I'll share some of the high level ones, and then I'll share some of them. Some of them are still recent, and it's interesting to see. I would say I think it took me at least 6 months from the moment I got to London to start properly letting people into what was happening for me. And so, when I did, I shared on some level how I was doing with people, not necessarily the full details. Actually, frankly, I think my closest friend, the one I phoned up, and my other housemate, they didn't really realize the full extent of what was going on for me until probably about a year in. They knew I was having a few struggles and like some self-identity issues and whatever else, but actually saying the word suicide and saying that I wanted to end my life, I didn't say that until a lot later on. So I actually sought, help and therapy for myself before I felt comfortable saying that word to people I was close to. And I would say that was one step, was going out and getting therapy. The other was actually making a conscious choice that this was going to be a top priority for me, figuring this out and getting to a stage where I wasn't in this state of distress and I wasn't feeling this desire to end my life. I made that a priority above actually starting the business, and above a lot of other goals in my life. And so the conscious choice to be like, this has to be the number one thing until I'm at a stage where I don't feel this way, was, I think, a really big, also important decision and turning point. And with that came, things like signing myself up for a 10-day silent meditation retreat for the first time, and really kind of thinking through what other types of people I might need to be working with. So I had a therapist, and then I also got a coach. And, so that I put a lot of time and resources towards this, because, I mean, ultimately I recognized if I don't, like, I may not be here. And so really, is there a price tag associated with that? And is there a time associated with that? Like, if you're in that situation, if you've recognized it, it just made sense to me that had to be my number one until I was out of it.
Yeah, you made me think about a conversation I was listening to recently. It was also someone reflecting on their experience with the ideation about suicide. And I believe I remember it was a woman. And she said this thing about celebrating the fact that she decided to wake up in the morning and take the one step to take a shower. And then celebrate that from shower you take breakfast. So it was such really fractional small steps, but they felt as a huge endeavor for her at that point. So that came into my mind as I was listening to you, that it is as building a puzzle and building the sort of foundation. But I also find really, again, I think uber important on the foundation level is what you said about putting the level of priority and just bringing it into from unconscious to conscious, and to say that unless I verbalize it, put the words into it, but also see that this is what's happening right now. I can see right now around me, it's both in friend circle and family circle, like close family circle, is that there are people who are in like quite deep struggles. And I think the observation from outside, which by the way, that's a completely different space to talk about if you are on the other side and you are observing someone, right? And someone close to you going through such situation, like how do you actually show up or don't, right? It's a tricky place as well. I think the observation right now is that there is still not that level of some level of awareness. So it's like it keeps being piled up under other things and just giving it different facelifts. And it just feels like it cannot really move forward in a healthy way. So I think that we are coming back again here to your level of some level of self-reflection, self-awareness. So
I think it's amazing that you made a choice. I think hearing you say that is, I decided this has to be top priority for me. Is we actually, in all the episodes we had in the podcast with those people, I don't think I've ever heard that with that level of clarity, that somebody went, okay, this is what's going on. I have options. At least I think I have options, but I'm making a conscious choice that this has to be sorted out first. This has to come first. And my approach is something that I also think gives you a sense of purpose. And probably also as an entrepreneurial mind who is a perfectionist going, well, then I need to fix this now.
Let me fix it. Yeah, figure it out.
Which, is probably also not always helpful, right? Like viewing yourself as broken and let's go and fix it. Like that, there's some issues with that too. But I do think that prioritization and that acknowledgement, at least for me, was really important, because it's such a shift from like, also, I think it's very linked to the stigma, right? It's such a shift from like, let's just sweep this under the rug and we can toughen up and we can make things happen or whatever else, like all of these different things that people may feel when they go through this stuff. It's like, it's okay, it happened today, but it won't happen tomorrow. We don't have to think about it too hard. It's really easy to kind of hope that it goes away by itself. And it often doesn't, right? And so, yeah, the conscious choice, I think, for me was super, super important in being able to get there. I'm actually curious to pick up on what you were just saying, Vladdy, about your friend, or another person in another episode was talking about taking a shower, and you asked what were the steps, and so I shared there were many steps, and some of them were recent, and I think you were both going to really, really love this one. And I forget exactly what's written on here, which is why it exists, so this may be embarrassing, but I'm going to go just behind my door, and I'm going to get a list of paper, and I'm going to show you this.
Okay. I'm very curious.
So if you give me 1 second, I'll be
Please.
right back, and you'll see why.
Okay. This is live happening, real time. Wonderful.
It's behind the door.
How are your energies?
Good.
Good? Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it's probably somewhere to at least above 8.5. So
Meanwhile,
I
yes, Juliette's coming back.
We've got Juliette back.
So we talked about earlier, the signs that the signs and the pieces that lead up until the point where you realize that you're in a place where actually, yeah, you are suicidal. Well, I want to kind of rewind back to that and take a moment and go, those signs apply not just to your first realization, but to, all of those dips. And I think for a lot of people, when they're going through this stuff, it's not like, oh, I'm constantly suicidal every day. It's frequently like, hey, actually, I've had a period where I've been doing pretty well for 2 weeks, and then something happens and it just starts to kind of disintegrate the good habits or the things that were keeping you going, and then you're kind of back going towards this place, and depending on when you catch it, you're going to end up low enough that you're having those thoughts again. And so there's this kind of ebb and flow of like really good times and really hard times, that I think you can find across quite a lot of folks who go through many of these different pieces. And when I had that moment, which we actually haven't talked about, and I'm happy to talk about it more at some other point, but when I had the moment where I most strongly sort of stepped away from those suicidal thoughts a few months ago, initially I felt like, great, that's it, we're done, it's never going to happen again, like I've done the work, I'm not suicidal, we're game over, woo, we won. And that high of feeling like I'd solved it lasted for maybe like 4 months or so, because there was a significant shift, and there was mindset stuff, and there was me starting an hour a day meditation practice, and all of these different pieces. And so there was a true shift, and there's a huge difference between where I was then and where I am now. And yet part of recognizing, for me at least, that it's not truly game over, was actually you can always go back there, right? I think when I invited Dr. Freeman to speak to some of the entrepreneurs that I used to work with in California, there was a quote that he shared at the time that stuck with me. It was, mental health is just like a sport. You're either practicing and getting slightly better, or you're neglecting your practice and you're stagnating and gradually going down. And I think that frame is super important and super powerful, because it's just easy, right, to think, okay, I've solved the big thing, and I can just go back to how I was before and not keep the good, mental hygiene, so to say, that's needed. And so when I had my first proper dip after 4 months of thinking, yes, I'm through my suicidal phase, and I didn't get to a stage where I was feeling like I wanted to end my life, but I did get to a stage where it was almost like I could see the veil, right? I could see how close I was to those types of thoughts. And I was like,
but isn't that the improvement? Isn't that the win? I'm thinking
It's
that
the
that's the win.
It's absolutely, I mean, it's a win that I wasn't back down there.
Absolutely.
for
That you were
me,
able to see.
yeah.
I see.
But for me, when I'd gone through 4 months of not having any of it, and where in my mind I naively thought, hey, you know, we're done, we figured it out, we had such a strong breakthrough, and like we're over this, right? It was, for me, I had to like deal with the reality of actually, hey, you know, mental health is like a sport. You have to keep paying attention to it, and you know, keep improving on it, and and if you get to a certain level in a sport, then maybe you get your drops are not dangerous enough that they get you close to that. But that realization was you know, difficult to face, but it led to me reflecting on what is it in terms of signs that can lead to those downward spirals. And so the sheets of paper that I want to get you around these process,
let's get to it.
I actually made a list in the last few months of the signs that I might not be doing so well. And I made this for myself, but I also made this for my housemates who I live with, who, you know, actually were some of the people who started pointing out some of these signs. And so this might be slightly embarrassing, but
by the way,
here
I absolutely love the second part. Like the fact that you are informing the people around you, the support system, that by the way, these are the things, can you watch out? I think that's just uber powerful. But please.
I love it. And, you know, for whoever's listening to this, please plagiarize this, use it, because it's, for me, it's been important. So I've got this first list. I don't know if it's going to blur it out. I can maybe remove the blur or just hold it up.
It is blur. No, if you, there, we can see most of it. Yeah.
Okay. So this one's called Downward Spiral. And on this list, I'm just going to read it out to you. The first bullet point is room equals chaos. So how is my personal space looking? Is it tidy? If it's not, something might be going on. The second bullet point is, when did I last shower? The third bullet point is, have I meditated? The fourth bullet point is, are there dishes left around the house? The fifth bullet point is, am I inefficient in my work or starting to work late at night? I then have no hobbies or social life, question mark. Levels of daily radiance, which is kind of a phrase that I've come up with. I don't like the word happiness, but radiance feels like I'm just like, yeah, I'm just. So what's my level of daily radiance? Do things feel too much? Am I not sleeping? Am I avoiding something? And am I engaging in escapism, which is my biggest coping mechanism? I'll just bury myself in a book or a TV series or whatever else and not think about what the disturbing emotion that I'm having is. And so I have this list, and it's like, below the list is the scale that goes from 0 to 10 plus. And it's like, if I've ticked X many of these things, if it's like up to 2, there's like a little note that says, let's get back on track. If it's like close to 6, it's like, please help. And if it's like above 8, it's like, oh shit. And so this list, both for me and for my housemates, it's like a little pointer of how things that are physical around me start to break down if my mental health starts to break down. So like, I will stop caring about my usual standards of cleanliness, or, you know, like, am I leaving the dishes? Is the apartment tidy? Like, what does my room look like? Do I care about like how I feel right now in terms of, am I exercising? Am I eating properly? Am I sleeping properly? Am I showering? And so that's the list. And then this one, which Vladdy, you're going to love, is the first responders guide.
Where is the response? Oh, I love it.
So this is the counterpart to the list. And it goes, what are the things that I need for myself or for my housemates to help me get out of those spirals, and just kind of pick it back up at whatever point in time we realize it's happening. Cool, let's go in. And I do creating momentum with small things, like starting to get something done so that I can feel good about myself, because it creates just a little bit of a boost to my morale. Creating a to-do list so I can just feel like I'm in control of some pieces of what's going on in my life, because I probably let a bunch of stuff slip, and then that adds so many layers to what's going on, of like, you failed to do X, you're not doing Y, you're whatever else. And so if I can just write it all down and it's not in my head, then it's more concrete. And then I create space for reflection and deep work to actually figure out what it is that started the spiral in the first place, and is there something bigger that I need to tackle. And then the last one that I wrote is just being there either for myself or them being there for me, and helping me feel loved. And those together are the first responders guide that I created.
It's your oxygen. Beautiful.
Speechless is not the right word, but I'm so happy that you put on the table something we actually don't talk much about, which is, it's not only finding the language for yourself to acknowledge that something's off, but also being able to articulate to others around you how they need to engage with you when they spot something. Because very often the isolation comes from the outside not knowing how to, or not seeing it. And you sort of tackle both by one saying, hey, these are the signals so you can spot something's off. But if you do, then also know that this is an easy way, or not an easy way, but this is a way that this is my language, which is just amazing, absolutely amazing. I can't wait to be able to share this with our community as well. And of course, the list is very personal to you, and that's the key thing, right? It comes from your own level of introspection and your experiences to be able to say, well, based on what I know about myself, these are my signs.
Yes, sorry. No, go for it. Go for it.
I was just gonna say, like, after I made this list, the housemates who I showed it to, they were like, oh shit, like 5 out of these 10 also apply to me when I'm going through something rough. And so it led to this whole conversation about like, oh, okay, apparently we all start neglecting, you know, all of these different things when we're going into like our cocoons and not feeling good about something. So yeah, it's also a good conversation starter to see if other people in your life lead the same.
It's one of the tougher icebreakers that you could use, but you know, I found on the top of Nektarios, which you said, which I absolutely agree with, 2 other things that I really enjoyed, and I think they're very inspirational. One was that I feel like when either myself, when I guide, let's say my community or my team over here, in some level of self-reflection around well-being, we usually go into the space of identifying what are my stressors, what sort of cause me to be out of line and out of balance. And then I go into the first aid, my oxygen, right? The piece that we have not talked about at all are what are actually the signals that I am out of balance. Like the stuff that you had on your first list, I was just listening to, and I was like, I never done this for myself. Either have I ever asked my team to reflect on how do they show up to world, either through their activities or behavior, or just how they generally show up as self. And I think that's really insightful. And I was already thinking we have this well-being session on Friday, so I'm gonna just put it on the table for everyone. I think the other part was that the piece I really love about this is that the moment we bring the unconscious to conscious, I think there is a realization that this also requires the effort and showing up, and it does require the work. The fact that you sit down and you ask yourself those questions, you made those lists, you took the effort, because I often feel like we come into the space of mental health with some sort of assumption that, okay, I'm maybe going to name certain things, or I'm going to see the therapist, and that's sort of it, and it should just magically happen for me. And I think that's the Michael Freeman sort of metaphor, is that you have to show up for it every day. Like, bring in the work, show up for yourself and for others, obviously, because ourselves impacts others, right? So I love the fact that you show that it takes the work, and I think it's really good to hear that, and sort of feels very grounded, and like I'm really enjoying that part. So let's do the work.
You know, something I'll share is like, therapy is great, coaching is great, like both of those have been really helpful to me, but they were also an incredible source of frustration, because, you know, when you're going through this stuff and you're like, I want to end my life, and your therapist is like, cool, see you in a week. It's like, well, fuck. You know, like you can't, like there's I mean, maybe with means that I don't have. But for most people, there's not really such a thing as a like 24/7 on-call therapist, or someone that you can see regularly enough to feel like you're actually making progress in a time scale that seems like it would matter in the context of the level of thinking that you might be having. And so I think, you know, some of the power also of this type of stuff is a little bit of a level of like kind of control for yourself, right? It's like, how can I be my own therapist to some degree and at least monitor how I'm doing and try and fix stuff in the best way that I can with the resources I can in between those 1 week sessions, in between those different periods. And yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that I'm the only one who feels that frustration at like, yes, we finally got therapy. Oh crap, it's going to take how many months? And like, I get to see them how often? What?
Yeah, just living the reality, right? Just saying it as it is. Can I ask, how are you doing right now in this current period of life?
Yeah. You know, ups and downs. It's what I shared earlier about that kind of 4-month period of like, yes, I'm done. It's like, no, I'm not done. The reality is that about a month ago, I started having suicidal thoughts again. And, you know, I've had a few of those downward turns, and for most of them, I've caught them early enough, and the practices that I've had have meant that I'm not like as deep as I was. And my partner has this really great metaphor that helped me a lot when I was in one of those spirals, and I was just like, is this going to be my life forever? Like, what's the point? You know, why can't I do it? Why haven't I sorted this permanently? And he said, look, it's just like you're going in concentric circles, and like it might look like you're at the same place because you're coming back again and again, but ultimately that circle is getting wider every time, and it's different every time, and you've got new tools, and that really helped me. But yeah, I mean, a month ago, I had a day or two, or I guess, yeah, maybe 3 days of being back in that really dark space, and of having very violent thoughts about myself. And that was really, really hard to come to terms with, to be like, okay, it's not only that I know that I can feel it being distant, but it's actually, I'm having a moment of that right now. And yeah, and so, you know, to a certain extent, like the journey continues. More therapy, more checking in on myself. And it's better than it ever was. And I'm so grateful for the level of tools that I have in terms of just how much my meditation practice brings me. And, you know, perhaps an anecdote that I'd love to share here is, you both know that I just came back from a 10-day silent meditation retreat. It was a Vipassana for anyone who's a meditator on the line. And one of the biggest things that I got out of that, which didn't realize while I was in it, because when you're in it, you're like, why the hell am I not on a beach during my holiday? Why am I in a dark room meditating for 10 hours a day? But I came out, and with a few days of reflection and space, what I realized that I acquired through that meditation retreat was the ability to go from being in the movie to being in the cinema. And so now when I start to have these thoughts where it's like, you know, you suck at X thing, or like just the negative self-talk that'll maybe start some of this this kind of negative downward spiral. I, over the last week, despite having some pretty hard things happen in life, was able to sort of observe myself having those thoughts, and be like next to the thoughts rather than in the thoughts, and to watch the movie and be in the cinema rather than being a character in the movie myself. And wow, that made such a big difference, because it's like, oh, I can choose not to be part of that story. Like the story's continuing to play itself, but if I don't feed it and if I'm not in it, then it doesn't get worse. And so that's been for me, just another one of those little things, the signs of things getting better, and the extra tools, and we're going around in concentric circles, but the circle's a little bit bigger every time.
I think it's wonderful that you shared that, but it's also, well, it's a beautiful visual because it's easy to understand, but I think it's also a nice summary of our conversation somehow, because when we talk to people who are happy and generous enough to share their story, we want to see everything. We want to hear the dark moments. We want to hear about the signals, but we also want to leave people with hope and give them the tools. And you've given us quite a few tools. I mean, your list is an amazing tool, but that last bit, which can apply into so many different situations, you can take it away from the mental health conversations and still kind of put in the context of, don't be in the movie, watch the movie. It's just wonderful. I'm mindful of the time, so I think it's also maybe a good moment to wrap up. Vladi, what do you think? Do you have any more questions?
Yeah, I think so. I think I arrived somewhere on the 9.1 on my scale, so that's good. But also, frankly, I was coming into this conversation with this rage a little bit, and nearly a sense of, okay, I'm gonna go and show him afterwards, like I even sent that message, let's talk, I need to record now. There's a person, Nadine, people know in my life, business partner, life partner. So there's a lot to resolve there. But what you just shared around the movie and being in the cinema rather than being in the movie, I think I was actually playing it out as you were sort of describing it. And I think the power comes from then choosing otherwise and choosing actually the different way, which is not feeding a certain parts of my ego and the other triggers, right, that sort of want to be fed. And it feels quite liberating, and actually the fact that I have the choice, I think, Nektarios, I'm coming back to what you said before, is that to some level I feel today myself in this moment as Vladi that I have the choice. I understand that some situations often are more complex and we are not there, but in this moment I have it, and it feels quite liberating to actually apply it and show up. So thank you for that. And I truly enjoyed this conversation. And I wish you, that's a tough one. I think, do we well on that journey of being in a relationship with self? I think that's probably the best words that come to my mind just right now. And it's a pleasure to get to know you. So looking forward to more to come.
Maybe a question or a thought is, I recognize that when I originally made that speech, part of it was about, bringing attention to this in the context of the entrepreneurship. And also part of it was about the work that I'm currently doing with, another coach, leadership trainer, trained therapist, to actually try and change some of that. So I wonder if you'd be open to having one question about that we might be able to integrate in. And I don't know what the right kind of piece would be here, but
I actually have it here, but then I think we just got so immersed that we left it out. So yes, from my side, I think Nektarios, I assume we are aligned, unless you have a different view there. Okay, so I'll hit it off, and then we figure out where we place it with our team. So one last question as we are sort of building out on this line of hope and tools. I read in your post, and you also talked about it in your talk, something that really resonated with us, which is that you observed in sort of being side-by-side entrepreneurs and working with accelerators and VCs, is that the tools that the founders and entrepreneurs are provided with and the support that is directed is in the areas of business development, go-to-market strategies, financial modeling, you name it. And I think Nektarios and I, we are both like, yes. We went through that journey both of us, let's say 10 years ago, maybe a little earlier, the piece that is missing heavily is I feel like one of the most essential tools is the ability to show up every day and the human side. And how do you actually embark on this journey with the right, again, toolkit that empowers you to not lose it all and go through the experiences that we describe, even though often you can't necessarily fully impact that, but you can be on that circle and work on it. So I'm aware that you're working on something like this, which is quite exciting. So it would be wonderful to hear, and maybe there are people out there that would be then keen to collaborate. So let's give it a proper attention.
Yeah, so in the original speech that prompted this whole conversation, part of my, I guess, call to action in sharing some of that as widely as I did was to really publicly acknowledge that the layers of stigma and circumstances that entrepreneurs face in particular around mental health, in terms of needing to hide how they're actually doing because of the potential repercussion on VCs investing or not, or on employees who are already choosing an incredibly risky career path with a company that may just close within a year's time, not having another thing to worry about. Oh, is my boss not doing well? Like, is the company going to fail, and so forth? And there's so many factors that make it harder, even harder than the regular population, for founders to speak about what they're going through. And so acknowledging that, and acknowledging that we have structures like accelerators and incubators and organizations that make it their mission to try and prepare entrepreneurs for what they're going to go through, it felt to me like there was a missing piece, and a missing piece around actually providing tools and resources and really a program that would actually enable founders who are going through, or who likely will at some point in their founder career, go through significant difficulty, to feel more equipped to deal with that, and to feel more equipped to even just deal with the ups and downs of startup life. If you're part of the founders who are not experiencing mental health problems right now, great. All of this stuff still helps. And so how do we develop a program that has the ability to help you be more resilient, be even more resilient, and we call it Beyond Resilience, the program, in the face of those challenges? And so I partnered with a really incredible executive coach who has worked with a lot of startups. He's also trained in internal family systems therapy. And together we've created a program that actually can be offered to founders as part of things like accelerators, incubators, or even by a VC who wants their portfolio to have the ability to talk about some of this stuff. And it really ranges from, how do you manage the chaos? How do you reframe difficult situations to be serving you? How do you manage your energy levels? What does it take to be of support to your co-founder or to members of your team? How do you create an environment where people can share what it is that they need to share and be their best selves and create, to the best of your ability, some degree of safety and stability within what is an incredibly high pressure environment? And so there's lots of different components to this. And we've run it once already with an existing accelerator who's part of our program. And I'm excited to say actually that since I gave that speech, we've now had 3 more accelerator programs come forward and say, hey, we want to do this with us as well. And so my hope is that this type of tool, and I know there's probably others out there that folks are bringing to light, but I hope that these types of programs and the awareness of how we're missing out on this, of how we're not equipping entrepreneurs with the much more soft skills in some ways that actually are huge to their success, that will help them not burn out, that will help them not have conflict with their co-founders, that will help them thrive in the uncertainty and chaos that they face. I hope that more and more of the ecosystem, more and more of the accelerators and venture capitalists out there are going to see the need for that and are going to actually sign up to deliver this type of programming for the startups that they work with.
Let's go for it. No, that's wonderful. I mean, we are big supporters. We absolutely believe in the vision. I think it just fits into what we feel. Also, that systemically, if you want to start working and solving for the problem, you need to address. Nektarios, you had some thoughts.
No. I think I totally agree. This would take this conversation to a different direction, but we've done our bit on this by creating a compassionate investor masterclass to educate the investors on this. So we're all fighting for the same cause, with slightly different angles. But yeah, part of us for us is also very much looking how can we prevent and equip rather than fix, and that's our key mission in the Future Farm. That's why we're doing this. That's why we are privileged enough to get to have conversations with you and other founders and people who have gone through a lot and are happy to share with the same goal. So we're all aligned.
Wonderful.
Thank you both for this conversation.
Thank you. I feel so grateful that you shared with us, and it's one of those rare conversations that I actually walk away with some homework.
Yes, indeed.
That's the
Thank you.
best way to end it. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
So
Take care.
I'll